a looming and once beautiful colonial schoolhouse tucked into central Virginia, has earned the title of the most haunted location in the eastern United States. And y'all, in this case, I feel like that title is well earned. I'm Candace, and I'll be your guide. St. Albans Sanatorium, an ornate and formidable structure, spans an impressive 108,000 square feet, or that's 10,000 square meters. Sitting inconspicuously in the small town of Radford, Virginia, it would easily go unnoticed if it weren't for its reputation. The 131-year-old building has gradually fallen into disrepair, featuring the usual suspects: peeling paint, crumbling drywall, and a thick layer of dust covering the interior. It is also home to graffiti from local troublemakers during the building's time spent out of use. It looks every bit as haunted as it's claimed to be. As with any notoriously haunted location, this one is riddled with a dark and tragic history that leaves no one wondering how a location could end up with such extensive haunted residency. In 1755, the land the building resides on was home to the Draper's Meadow Massacres, where the Shawnee tribe clashed with colonial settlers before murdering at least 4 people, one of them being an infant in the middle of the night. Roughly 100 years following, many bloody battles took place on this same land alongside the New River during the U.S. Civil War, causing many more casualties. In 1892, the St. Albans School was constructed by the headmaster, George W. Miles. Being a Lutheran boys' school, there was a heavy emphasis on raising the next generation of Southern gentlemen within its walls. George's vision of a Southern gentleman meant that the boys would excel both in academics as well as on the sports field. An effort to encourage strong athletic competitors to be born from these kids, the school culture was one that promoted bullying and abuse. This outright encouragement of violence and harm amongst the student body, unfortunately, led to more than one suicide and the occasional homicide on school grounds. After George Miles' death in 1903, enrollment dropped sharply, possibly due to the school's reputation. Due to this, the school was shut down 8 years later. In 1916, Dr. John King bought the property with the goal of bringing a world-renowned psychiatric hospital to the area, offering patients a wealth of treatment options and superior care that was sorely lacking in that area. Hence, St. Albans Sanatorium was born. Despite his best intentions, psychiatric care was primitive and inhumane at best in the early 1900s. While measures were put into place to bring quality of life to the patients, such as a farm on the premises, a rooftop garden, and a bowling alley tucked into the basement of the hospital, that didn't negate the barbaric treatments patients were subjected to. One of such treatments you may recall if you listened to the Asheville episode was insulin coma therapy. In short, this involved injecting mentally ill patients with insulin to drop their blood sugar to comatose levels and holding them at the brink of death. The theory being that this time spent in a coma was therapeutic to their brain somehow. This often resulted in death, as you can imagine. Electroconvulsive therapy, otherwise known as electroshock therapy, was also commonly utilized, subjecting patients to rounds of electricity that would cause seizures. Lobotomies were in use as well around that time, where an area of the patient's brain the doctor deemed quote-unquote problematic were cut out, prodded, or impaled with instruments in an effort to destroy that part of the brain. Theoretically, this would improve symptoms, removing what were deemed as bad behaviors and increasing pliability as you can imagine. Trepanation was also utilized, which was similar, and involved cutting or drilling a hole into the top of the patient's skull, but this time leaving the brain intact. The theory being that missing a piece of skull could help enhance their consciousness. Finally, a treatment a bit more unique to St. Albans was hydrotherapy. And of course, it was not as therapeutic as it sounds. Patients were sometimes wrapped like mummies, from head to toe in cloths that had been soaked in ice water, and left that way for hours. Instead of this route, sometimes patients were placed into a bathtub full of water and strapped down into it forcibly for days at a stretch. And sometimes patients were even blasted with fire hoses. At the time, physical restraints were seen as barbaric, but hydrotherapy offered a method of coercion without the need for as much brute force. As you see, what they call hydrotherapy was actually outright torture by any standards, as were the rest of their quote-unquote therapies. As with so many things in life, despite Dr. King's best intentions, greed eventually got in the way. Far too many patients were admitted for the available staffing and space available, and before long, there were 6,509 patients, with only 48 staff members to care for them. The overcrowding led to blatant sanitation issues within St. Albans. This, combined with thousands of mentally ill patients, cruel and inhumane procedures, and very few staff to provide care or supervision, led to many more suicides within the space. One particular bathroom was later deemed the suicide bathroom due to how many patients took a bathroom trip to escape prying eyes and used that time to end their life. There were so many deaths at St. Albans Sanatorium that a morgue was established on site. Treatments evolved over the years, and the patient population at St. Albans declined, both by release and by death, until it finally closed in the early 1990s. It is not a stretch of the imagination for any believer in the paranormal, no matter how skeptical, that the dark history of this place, the amount of human suffering contained within, and the number of homicides and suicides on the grounds over the past 131 years have led to quite an extensive otherworldly residency at St. Albans. The building sat empty for several years, being vandalized by locals and falling into disrepair until it was obtained in 2003 by the current ownership, Tim Gregory, who is actually a former patient of St. Albans. Tim's goal was to create a quote-unquote research and enlightenment center by renovating the surrounding auxiliary buildings. To fund this goal, he allows paranormal investigations as well as running a haunted house from St. Albans through the fall months. Due to the influx of paranormal research teams and independent investigators, there is thankfully a wealth of information regarding the spirit activity on the hospital grounds. I was fortunate to stumble upon the book, The Ghosts of St. Albans Sanatorium, written by Pat Bussard-O'Keefe. It's a fairly thorough compilation of the experiences of numerous paranormal groups who've spent time at St. Albans and their experiences there. This book, combined with the other paranormal teams' websites, gave me an inside perspective on the sanatorium that I otherwise would have lacked. Despite having seen episodes of paranormal investigation shows on TV about St. Albans, I always err on the side of skepticism even more than usual with those. After all, I have a hard time believing that the networks would put considerable time and expense into making an episode where nothing happened at a location. Therefore, after reading all of these accounts, I admit I'm a believer. However much variety and hauntings you can imagine have all been experienced here at St. Albans. Partial and full shadow people have been seen, including shadow creatures, sometimes with glowing red eyes. Full body apparitions have been spotted. Levitating and flying objects have been hurled at investigators. Mists and orbs have been spotted moving throughout the space with the naked eye. Disembodied moans, screams, laughs, and voices are sometimes heard. Invisible entities are even known to make brief physical contact with investigators and patrons, sometimes even leaving their handprints on clothing. Sometimes crystal clear EVPs are obtained, and spirit box sessions that leave little room for interpretation. This massive 108,000 square foot building has so many rooms, as you can imagine, that they've taken on nicknames over the years, either hearkening back to their original purposes or to the paranormal activity that occurs within them. For instance, the hospital's rocker room contains a rocking chair that is often seen rocking on its own. Likewise, the whistle room is said to contain an entity that can eerily imitate your whistles back at you. The locked door room is just that. A room with unknown contents that has a door with a locked deadbolt. It is said if you knock on that room's door, someone knocks back. Those who fail to get a knock back have sometimes said they can hear feet shuffling and walking on the other side of the door. The spirit of Rebecca is a residual haunting said to reside at St. Albans. Rebecca was a patient who'd been pregnant, some theorized due to a sexual assault. She ended up losing the baby and was so devastated, she kept the fetus in a jar, which she hid in a hole in her closet. She would lovingly rock and sing to her jar on occasion until other patients told staff what was going on, and they took the fetus away. When this happened, Rebecca made her last visit to the suicide bathroom. Her bedroom now is home to a group of dolls that people have brought in hopes to prompt interaction with them. EVPs captured in this room are said to be quiet sighs of discontent. Donald's room is said to have been home to Donald, the janitor who worked at the sanatorium. He's a playful and mischievous spirit who is said to enjoy the company of men in his room and in his bedroom closet. Jacob's room is said to belong to a little boy named Jacob, who was left at the doorstep of the hospital by someone who wasn't able to care for him. St. Albans is said to have taken him in to raise him inside the sanatorium, in the staff quarters, across the hall from Donald's room. His bedroom is filled with toys that have been brought in hopes of interacting with the child spirit. Sadly, it is said that Donald, the aforementioned janitor, was a pedophile, and that little Jacob lost his life due to Donald's sexual abuse. It's uncertain at this point if this is in fact what happened, or if Donald was a convenient scapegoat as it was rumored that he was gay. With the event being in the past and little historical record, all that's left is the rumors to go by. When Coastal Virginia Paranormal investigated Jacob's room, they asked him what his favorite toy was. In response, they heard a coin fall to the floor and found a penny lying near one of their investigators. Now, this investigator swears that she didn't have any change in her pocket that day. As they continued attempting to interact with the spirit of Jacob, both investigators present got a strong sense of discomfort, enough to turn on a flashlight and look around. Then they spot a row of pennies a few feet away from them. They couldn't be certain that the pennies hadn't been there unnoticed previously, but it definitely gave them an eerie feeling. Those feelings were somewhat confirmed when both investigators left the room together, and upon their return hours later to gather equipment, all of the pennies had vanished. In the electroshock therapy room, one paranormal team had cameras set up while they explored other parts of the sanatorium. They watched a mist materialize in the room, and when they went to investigate it, the mist would dissipate. Over and over, they watched a mist form that refused to be witnessed by human eyes, but was repeatedly caught on camera. Investigator Crystal Porras from 3:33 a.m. Paranormal had one of her more hostile experiences while at St. Albans. An event was taking place where the paranormal team invited Friar Bob Bailey to St. Albans for a teaching event directed toward new paranormal investigators. Friar Bailey started the evening by making an announcement over the intercom, offering a prayer, then thanking Crystal by name for putting on the event. As Crystal and her team proceeded with the evening's investigation, the spirit box they were using said, "Crystal Porras, I've been a bad boy." The team brought out another spirit box that works using different technology, and it began doing the same thing. The voices manipulating the box became more aggressive, stating, quote, "You whores, I am going to hurt you," unquote, as well as, "I'll kill you." Crystal says that she's had spirits call her by name before, but never her first and last name together, and especially never so aggressively. She feels that the spirits at St. Albans were clearly angered that she had brought a Catholic priest into the building. One of the more terrifying encounters I stumbled upon was when El Khan Society of the Paranormal members were in a room called the Safe Room, deemed that because of the large old-school safe contained within. The two investigators present finished up with what they were doing and went to leave the room, only to find the door to the room missing entirely. They slowly walked along the walls of the room, touching and examining, making lap after lap with understandably growing concern, when finally, the doorway spontaneously reappeared where it hadn't been before. Southeast Virginia Paranormal Investigators, or SVPI, was visiting St. Albans one night and using a spirit box device. While passing through the stairwell of the building, the box spontaneously said, "Look up." The investigator, Todd, looked up to see a face popping out from the top of a doorway. He cursed, startled, and the spirit box then said, "The devil." With the EMF detector spiking, he got a better look at the entity's face. Todd explains it looked as if the face were coming out of a pitch-black portal, so only the frontmost part was seen. It was hairless, with sunken eye sockets without eyes. Its jaw was elongated, and he says its mouth was open further than is humanly possible. After regaining his composure, the group proceeded with its investigation to experience equipment failures that were atypical with previous experiences. This entity may or may not be the same as the one people call the Creeper. Scott of Seven Cities Paranormal was unloading equipment one day when he noticed a black figure just step out of the wall at the end of the hallway. He watched it skitter across the hallway on all fours when it turned its head and looked right at him. The entity didn't have any facial features that he could see. The entire thing was just blacker than black. But he felt that intense stare as they each stood frozen, staring back at one another. Finally, it turned and ran back into the wall. Jenny, also a member of Scott's group, was investigating when she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She turned and found herself face to face with the Creeper. It had peeked its head out from behind a door. Its head oblong and ugly, according to Jenny. Its arms and legs long and spindly. It stared at her with its head cocked in an unusual position, she says, as if the head moved abnormally on its neck. She moved toward the doorway to leave the room and was horrified to see that the creeper had moved into the room with her before disappearing into the shadows in a darkened corner of the room. The basement, which within contains the boiler room as well as the bowling alley, is considered to be a terribly active location, particularly with dark entities. The boiler room is said to be home to one of those dark entities named Smokey. He obtained this nickname as it is said if you offer him cigarettes, he will interact with you. It is also said that Smokey was known to drag women into the boiler room to sexually assault them, and women are warned not to venture there alone during investigations. Female investigators who do venture to the boiler room have experienced groping and the feeling of tugging at their clothing. The bowling alley is another paranormal activity hotspot in the sanatorium. Originally designed to be a reward for the patients, now it's home to a dark and possibly demonic entity deemed Red Eyes. Red Eyes is said to be a shadow entity with glowing red eyes who inhabits the basement area, making clanging, banging sounds and scaring off visitors and police who have ventured there. Another demonic entity nicknamed Goatman is also said to live here in the basement, but little is known about that one. Visitors to the basement area are said to often experience bursts of extreme heat or cold temperature, either in the boiler room or in the bowling alley, and hear unexplained growls and snarls. One of which instances is when investigators comprised of 3:33 a.m. and Appalachia paranormal groups investigated the bowling alley. They had an EVP session that left them too shaken up to continue. They heard growling, then every woman specifically present experienced the growling directly into her ear. Coastal Virginia Paranormal got a great EVP in the bowling alley of what sounds exactly like the ball return operating, although it's completely non-functional and has been for years. The spirit of Gina Renee Hall is said to occupy the basement area as well. Gina is a murder victim who left a bar nearby with a man named Stephen Epperly, never to be seen again. No one knows what Stephen did with Gina's body, but Gina's car was found near the sanatorium. Some believe it's possible that her body was incinerated in the hospital's basement. Also, Stephen is said to have worked there at one point doing some gravel work and was very familiar with the building and the land. It is believed that it's Gina's spirit haunting the grounds, and some say that if you say her name in the bowling alley, an eerie, unexplained mist will fill the room. These stories are only a drop in the bucket of experiences described as occurring within St. Albans Sanatorium. As the haunted hospital continues to offer investigations, I wonder if it will continue to be as active as it has been, or if the activity will taper off eventually. Some believe that the annual haunted house set up within those walls encouraged the spirits to stay active. And some even feel that it's exploitive to the remaining spirits who reside there. Due to the high level of activity here, I feel that it probably deserves its reputation as the most haunted location in the eastern United States. All right, y'all. That's the story of St. Albans Sanatorium. Now let's talk about it. So I did expect to find some evidence of hauntings. Again, this place has been investigated on a few paranormal shows, but I didn't expect this much. Finding that book was really a godsend for this story because it just lays everything out so perfectly. So that was really great. As usual, you get a bunch of suffering, pain, grief, death, all of that misery layered in one place, person after person. And of course, you get hauntings. That's like the recipe. Like if someone wrote a recipe book for hauntings, you layer suffering, pain, grief, and death. And there you go. But this one is a double whammy of dark history, considering starting in the 1700s, It began with native skirmishes and then went to Civil War battles that were numerous. And the reason they were listed as numerous is it wasn't just a handful of battles. There were several double digits battles during the Civil War in that exact spot. And then when you add in that it was a school where kids were encouraged to hurt one another, and then a mental hospital where patients were abused, God, what do you expect? There are some really good EVPs online from St. Albans. I tried to get permission to use some of them in the episode, but no one got back to me. So I'll link them in the sources so you can go listen for yourself. Some of them are so unmistakable. The door vanishing story is absolutely terrifying, but at the same time, it's one of the lesser believable stories to me. It sounds more like panic, honestly. Well, I do believe that spirits can manipulate surroundings to a degree, probably a small degree, in my opinion. Making a door disappear doesn't sound realistic, but if it really did happen that way, that is horrific. Somehow, the crawler is strangely more believable to me and absolutely terrifying. I would love to know why it is that some of these ultra haunted locations all have a creature that crawls. Has anyone else noticed that? It's very interesting. Yeah, it should be noted, although I didn't factor into the story so much, I mentioned a rooftop garden as being one of the perks of St. Albans. Yeah, they call it a bird cage because it is basically a little prison on the third floor. There is a little porch that they enclosed with heavy steel wire. So it's not even like a screened-in porch. It is more like a prison cage. It's always really hard for me to completely remove the human element from the equation when it comes to my skepticism. Like the locked door where no one knows what's on the other side and people tend to knock back. I can't help but be like, okay, clearly that's an office or something where people, living humans, work or whatever on the other side and knock back for funsies. That's just where my brain goes. And then the pennies in Jacob's room, that was a great story. But how can they be certain that no one came along behind them to move them? And, not so much human intervention, but with spirit box stories, I always wonder if they have any technology that can listen. Supposedly, they just offer radio waves the spirits can manipulate, and then they spit out a robotic voice. But there are just so many instances where I honestly feel like they're listening and spitting back a word that fits contextually or repeating a word. That might be overreaching in the skepticism, considering that type of design has never been disclosed that I'm aware of. But I think these are factors we should at least consider. And that's not to say that I don't think St. Albans is haunted. I do. I just think it's important to think about all of the factors. I always feel so awkward relaying stories based in rumor that really just demolish someone's reputation. Like the story of Donald, the potentially pedophilic janitor. I feel like these stories are the telephone game. We don't have any of this in record. And who knows what the truth really is. And if he did do that, of course he deserves to be talked about until the end of time and written down in history. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, being concerned about what a dead guy's reputation is, who probably isn't even aware of his own reputation. But anytime we talk about stories like this, I can't help but worry that someone is getting just repeatedly slandered based on what we have as no evidence, just kind of word of mouth. Maybe that's silly, but considering I don't have any records, all I can do is offer you what I've read and what research I can do and hope that it's the truth. So the stories that I relate about the boiler room and the bowling alley, the whole basement area of St. Albans, that area is supposed to be much more terrifying than what these stories relay because they're largely subjective stories. People that have been down there talk about being touched, getting an overwhelming sense of dread. They're supposed to be very terrifying to actually be in and experience for yourself. As always, I want to know what you think. Do you believe that St. Albans is haunted like I do? Of course, I want to hear your opinions. I also want to thank you for hanging in there with me this week because if you cannot tell, I have been sick and my voice is really struggling today. It's that time of year where, especially if you have kids in school, you're just repeatedly sick until spring. So sorry if I sound a little rough, but I wanted to still get the episode out. Tell me your thoughts on social media at Obscure Appalachia. You can also email me at obscureappalachia@gmail.com. The Patreon is alive. It's alive and up at patreon.com/obscureappalachia if you'd like to support the podcast. If you like the show, you can tell a friend about it or leave a review because either would be so helpful. Thanks, y'all. Until next time.